I think that the house was built actually over a span of probably the years 1938 and 1939. It took more than 1 year, so to speak, because of the way that it was built.
I do remember, though, that two Hipsher men, that they did a lot of the building of the house.
There was one master carpenter who worked full time, and then there were farmhands who were either working in the fields or helping Dad milk cows. And when they finished with the milking, then they would come and help the carpenter build the house.
My dad, Jim D. Watson, and a man named Gay Hipsher, who lived near us over in the Junction community, which is where I was born. Daddy and Gay Hipsher built this house. And like I say, I don't know how long it took them to build it, but I think we moved into it in 1939, before Christmas.
During the Depression, and I think it's because he had a dairy that he was able to do better than most farmers were. And this was through hard work that he managed to have some money, even though, and of course, land was not high everything went pretty cheap during the Depression. But he bought, I think, a portion of what had been 4 small farms.
And even during the Depression, when everyone else was in such dire straits, and somehow he managed to buy land. When everyone else was losing their businesses and losing their homes, he still managed to buy land.
Well, of course, the major material with this being a rock house, and thing I think is really neat, is the rock came off the farm. So the rock was picked up by the farm, off of the farm, and brought in and placed on the walls. And one of the interesting things about the house is that all of the trim around the doors, the archways, the windows, all of the trim is limestone. And so all of the limestone was quarried on the farm and chipped, so to speak, to fit into place. And I assume took quite a bit of physical labor to get every stone to fit the way that they wanted it to fit. So it was very much a handmade custom house.
I don't know how they got it done, but I don't know how people nowadays would get it done. Not like they did then. If you look at that porch, that's a big porch, and it's up pretty high. And there's a lot of rock in that house, and then those arches too.
I always thought that house is beautiful. The arches always strike me as just being gorgeous. I love arches to this day, I think, from looking at that house. It's strong. The rock is just gorgeous. And then it would have a windmill in the back. I mean, it's a beautiful house.
I think it was Daddy's idea. I think it was his idea that he wanted those arches, and I remember hearing him speak about wanting a front porch, or he called it a wraparound porch.
The stories that I was told is that the lumber for the house, it was actually lumber that was taken out of prior dwellings. I'd heard that when the school was consolidated and a one-room schoolhouse was abandoned, well, my dad would buy the schoolhouse and tear down the lumber and save it until this house was built. And I know when we started remodeling the house, it was kind of interesting when we got all the walls back down to the solid wood, that there was lumber that it was not uniform at all. It runs in all different directions going through the walls. Some of the old lumber would have paint on it, some of it wouldn't. But so in 1938, probably the wood was many decades old before this house was even built. So and there's not a wall in this house that you could put a sledgehammer through. Every wall is solid wood. There's no such thing as a stud in the house.
I don't think they had any drawn out plans or anything. They just went. Now, Gay Hipsher was a good carpenter, very good carpenter, and a very good cabinet maker and all that. I'm sure they probably had to get someone to help with the plumbing and the electricity, but I don't know who. But other than that, they built the whole thing and hauled the rock. All the rock on the outside is from this place. And they went out and found all that and hauled it up and everything. Both of them were farmers, and of course, my dad had the dairy and farming, and so they didn't work during the day. They waited until all their farm chores and dairy chores were done. Then they'd come over here and work on it until dark. I remember hearing someone say that when it was completely finished, that all the materials and I guess what he paid Gay Hipsher for helping him came to over $3,000.
Well, after our mom left here and went to move and live in town, the house kind of went into a state of vacancy and basically disrepair. For several years, we actually rented the house out to hunters who came and they just lived in it when they were here hunting. But around, I think the year was 1999 that Ann and I decided that we were going to remodel the house. There was a point when David and I bought our sisters out, and we picked the land that we were going to buy, and I ended up with the land that had the house on it. And so that was somewhat of a predicament because you can't just walk by and watch it fall apart. So we decided that we were going to restore it. So I believe the year was around 1999 when we finished our restoration. And the restoration was kind of strange, and it was almost similar to the way that my father built it, in that we had two men come in and work on this house, and it took them about 18 months. And just two men completely remodeled it. Now, when I say remodeled, we tried to keep the theme of the house to being a farmhouse. And we wanted to leave as much original as we could and yet modernize it with the things like air conditioning and central heat and air. Like I said, it just took them a long time, but we restored a lot of the stuff that went back original. Even things went back original to the time it was built. During the years, such modern things had occurred as linoleum, and there was a lot of the house that had linoleum on the pine floors, and we had all that linoleum stripped off, and that was quite a chore. The guys that reworked this guaranteed me that whatever they put that linoleum down with would have been illegal today, because it stuck, and so they took all that up and came back and redid the floors. One of the things that I find is kind of unique is that the framing, the door framing, the baseboards, all like that, haven't been touched. That's exactly the way they were in 1939. And it's just what we call a varnish finish to them. And it's held up quite well.
Ann and Collier are very generous with the farmhouse, and they love to have people come there and stay there, and they've invited other people to come and do that. But everybody looks forward to going to the farmhouse, and they've been generous enough to let us come there every year and sort of trash their house for a little bit.
And I think the family enjoys that. I think the grandchildren really enjoy meeting at the farmhouse and kind of getting to see where we grew up and hear stories about things that we did at the farmhouse.
I know it's theirs. I totally respect that, and yet everybody thinks it's their house too. I think it's my house too. And I hope it stays in our family forever, whatever that family picture looks like, because it's just a really cool place.